On a moonless night somewhere in the Kakadu National Park located in the Northern Territories, Australia, an Aboriginal family breaks the darkness with the familiar yellow glow of a campfire. The eldest of 3 children is telling a story about a misbehaving clan and when it was punished by an angered ancestral being. Looking on and paying close attention to her words were her parents and her grandparents, 2 further generations of the same family that had themselves at one point been the tellers of this story. You see, it was known that stories passed down using word of mouth and songs could last for around 800 years before the rigors of time and memory degraded them. That really does demonstrate the power of stories, doesn't it? 800 years. However, quite often what we know to be true is proven to be wrong. You see, at one point we knew that the sun and the planets revolved around us, and that the Earth that we were on, we knew it was flat. And until 2015, we knew that stories could survive around 800 years. However, this story about an angered ancestral being gouging a groove in the land with a magical kangaroo bone to cut off this problematic tribe from the mainland, and over 20 others like it that describe events such as the loss of hunting land, the joining of 2 different tribes, wars over disputed lands and territories, and other things as vital as what plants, nuts, berries, and animals were safe to eat in new locations. These stories have been linked to a specific geological event. An event where, due to melting glaciers, the sea level rose in a single generation, and Aboriginal tribes in Australia were forced to retreat and relocate, bringing land into competition and tribes into contact. Why don't we know about this? Why don't we understand? Okay, Australia wasn't discovered by Western society at that point, but sea levels would have affected the whole world. Well, why isn't this documented? Well, if you think back to myths and legends from throughout our history, there is often retold a tale of a great flood. And geologists and historians have linked this flood to an event that happened 7,000 years ago. Due to the social scaffolding that's in place in Aboriginal culture around storytelling, where the older children educate the younger and are themselves schooled on the accuracy of their tale by those who have regaled it for decades, these stories have survived intact for over 300 generations. Stories are powerful. They transcend time, survive the rise and fall of empires, and continue to educate communities on life-saving skills and the accepted moral code. And when we use stories correctly in BNI, we develop the ability to communicate, to educate, to influence, and to inspire our members into taking action. We create true action heroes. You see, the people we tell these stories to, they adopt the correct behaviors. They grow the right mindset and they embrace our moral code, our core values, not because they're told to, but because they want to. You see, if you do it correctly, mastering storytelling will be the single most impactful skill for your BNI journey, your business, and your life that you can ever develop. But we do have a problem. And the problem is, how do you teach someone to be a good storyteller? Well, imagine this. Imagine you book yourself some driving lessons. And as you walk to the front of the car and you go to get into the driver's door, the driving instructor puts his hand on the pillar and stops you. And he asks you to go and sit in the passenger seat. So you walk around the car and you climb into the passenger side and sit down. Your instructor explains that he is an excellent driver and has often been complimented on his ability. So for the next hour, you will observe his driving skills, which, of course, you do. For the next 12 weeks, every Tuesday evening when your lesson comes around, you eagerly go to climb into the driver's seat. But he stops you and you are directed around to the other side of the vehicle. You watch for hours on end as a highly skilled professional shows you the perfect way of controlling and piloting that vehicle. He is excellent. And on week 13, you sit in the driver's seat for the very first time and take your driving test. Do you think you would pass? Of course you wouldn't. You see, there's a Roman politician who I often quote who says, the skill to do is in the doing. And that's the case not only with driving lessons, but a lot of skills that we have to develop in life. And storytelling is one of them. We need to do some storytelling. Now, you see, I've seen some of the very best storytellers from around the world, both people inside BNI, people like Charlie Lawson, people like Ivan Meisner, people like Frank D'Arraffi. I've also seen wonderful storytellers outside of BNI. And what do? Well, they tell amazing, engaging, emotional, reactive stories, and we have a great time listening to them. We're entertained, we're enlightened, and we're sometimes inspired to do things. We often leave a room with a greater understanding of why we should tell stories. And maybe we even leave with a few stories to retell. But we rarely leave a room with a better understanding or ability of how to tell a great story. See, we need a system and a process, and we need to understand the mechanics behind it. Now, this was quite alien for me because I am a big advocate of explaining the why. And I think we do know why we tell stories in BNI. We tell stories to influence entrepreneurs and free-spirited, like-minded, forward-thinking individuals into taking action. We know why. They entertain and they inspire. But if someone hasn't had the ability to tell stories, we need a system and process to explain how to develop that. And I'm going to ensure that that happens today. And don't get me wrong, there are hundreds of systems out there. I've done a lot of research for this presentation. And I found Venn diagrams. You've got to love a Venn diagram. I found flowcharts and worksheets and step-by-step instructions and timelines of how to tell the perfect story. And I'm known as quite a good storyteller. I often get complimented on just how thought-provoking, engaging, and impactful my stories are. and I couldn't get any of my stories to fit into one of these pre-subscribed systems. And then I realized that all of the systems out there are fundamentally flawed. They are all based on the same principle. They may be redrawn or rehashed, but they're based on an outdated system. And it's a system that we all know and love. And it's one that we use in BNI regularly. And the concept is that you need to tell them, tell them, tell them. So you lay out what's going to happen and you give them the heads up. You then tell them the story and then you recap the reason why you've told them. And this system, do not get me wrong, is brilliant. But it's brilliant when we're putting together a skills workshop or a business presentation or an educational session in academia. But when we're looking to engage members and people in the business world, this system is one tellem too long. It's the first tellem. We need to remove the setup and go straight into the story. You see, the problem is we're dealing with people whose minds are trying to get to the point. The attention span isn't what it used to be, and it simply doesn't affect them in the same way if they know what's coming. The old tell 'em system doesn't reflect the way we engage in today's society. You see, Microsoft did a study, and since the year 2000, attention spans have decreased by 33%. And this is due to the availability of platforms that offer instant gratification. And because they do that, we simply do not have to pay attention for very long to get a reward anymore. You see, if you think we have mobile devices, and whilst we're on the mobile device, we're also streaming media. We have gaming going on in the background. We're communicating with people on social media. And what that means is same-day delivery, on-demand streaming, cross-platform multitasking, social media. We get a dopamine high, an instant hit every time we get a like or a view, we read a funny meme, we watch a TikTok, or we order that product knowing that as soon as we click go, it is already on its way to us. We are less willing to invest our time and attention than we were 20 years ago. However, there is some good news. The good news is because we are less willing and not used to investing our time, when we grab someone's attention and keep them engaged, when that hit comes, when that reward comes, it will land with far more impact than anything they've experienced in recent memory. Let me give you an example. In 1983, George Lucas said cut on the most successful sci-fi trilogy of all times, Star Wars. He had just wrapped the final scene in the last of 3 movies, Return of the Jedi. See, George Lucas had grown up on fairy tales about knights and princesses and living happily ever after. So when he had the opportunity to make his passion project, he set a fairy tale in space. And because of some very clever negotiating and maintenance of merchandising rights, his studio, Lucasfilms, became an incredibly wealthy and successful enterprise. So much so that they developed new special effects, they developed new sound techniques, new filming techniques, and they were one of the first to develop computer graphics for film. So for his next project, he looked to the next stage of his life. So he left the fairy tales behind and he looked at what his passion was as a teenager, and it was comic books. And we've seen an amazing comic book revolution in recent years with the Marvel and the DC franchises and the intertwined universes between games and TV, literature and movies. So who did George Lucas pick to be his first comic book adaptation on screen? Now, I want you to write in the chat bar who you think George Lucas, what character do you think George picked? Now, bear in mind, we've had Iron Man and Thor and Batman and Superman. We've had some real obscure ones like the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Umbrella Academy. Who do you think George Lucas picked? Well, this is pre-recorded, but I'm going to predict, unless you're a real comic book geek, you wouldn't have picked a 3-foot duck called Howard. But that's what George Lucas did. He invested a lot of money and a lot of time into developing the comic book character Howard the Duck into his next movie. And me and my brother saw this movie when we were about 8 or 9 years old, and we adored it. It was amazing. However, 8 and 9-year-old brothers were about the only people who adored it. You see, this movie about a 3-foot duck with a passive underlying love story between America's sweetheart, the mum from Back to the Future, was a critical and commercial failure. It has gone down as one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. And George Lucas was left with a huge hole in his finances. So he looked around and he tried to work out which bits of his business he could break off and sell. And they all kind of related to each other, apart from this totally new and totally underutilized section of the industry, which was the graphics group. So he broke that away from Lucasfilms and he sold it. He sold it to someone who was currently unemployed. He was an executive that had just been fired from his own company and he was unemployed. So this person bought the graphics group and renamed it. The person who bought it was Steve Jobs, and the name he gave it was Pixar. And Pixar started developing this new technology. In the early 90s, they released the first ever fully computer-generated feature movie, Toy Story. It won critical and box office success and picked up awards in categories that were invented specifically for Toy Story. And Pixar continued to churn out wonderful movies. In the year 2000, they outgrew their headquarters and they bought an old Del Monte pineapple canning factory. They knocked down the factory and Steve Jobs met with the architect to review the plans of the new office. And there was this beautiful building which had been designed where each of the departments, the managing and accounting department, the computer and engineering departments, and the artist and storyboard departments all had their own floors with their own wonderful facilities where they could work together and produce these amazing movies. And Steve Jobs got a big red pen and put a line through those plans. He gave the architects a new brief and he sent them away. And when they came back, there was a 3-pointed building which had been designed. The engineers still had their own space. The artists and the storytellers still had their own space. And the accounting and the management staff still had their own space to work. But everything that they had to do away from their desk, whether it was the restrooms, the meeting rooms, the cafeteria, a chill out space, even the gift shop was located in a vast shared area. You see, Steve Jobs understood that people needed to come together and interact. You couldn't operate in your silos. And there are amazing stories that come out from the teams at Pixar. One with the art department. I sat around having a coffee with someone from the computer and engineering department, and they're saying, we're really struggling. We've got this creature. He's a main part of a movie. We're meant to have an emotional connection with him, but he just looks too scary. You know, his skin, his scales, it just makes him too intimidating. We can't get that connection. And the computer engineer runs back and goes through some notes from a meeting and finds a new bit of code which allows them to individually animate hundreds of thousands of hairs across a body, where they will move and sway in exactly the way that they would if they were a real creature. And that's why you get such a beautiful emotional connection with Sully, the big blue and purple monster from Monsters, Inc. Then there's a story of a computer engineer who has lunch with someone from the storyboarding department. And then he's boasting about this new program that they've just finished, where they can replicate the surface tension of water. And the storyboard artist goes back to his department and he changes the movie where this little fish can now break the surface of the ocean, speak to crabs and to seabirds and to sea lions. And it creates some of the most impactful, funny, and heartwarming moments of the whole movie, Finding Nemo. And finally, on a Bring Your Kid to Work day, a member of the accountancy department has their child on the floor of the shared space. The child is playing with these inanimate objects, but each of them has a name, each of them has a personality, and each of them has a part to play in his story. And the toys he was pushing around the floor were Hot Wheels cars. And on that day, Lightning McQueen was born. You see, Steve Jobs says that technology inspires art and art challenges technology. Technology enough. Technology is not enough alone. You need that shared space. And what we offer our members on a week-by-week basis is that shared space. That room where people can come into, and the plumber can bounce ideas off of the accountant, and the electrician can speak to the builder who's 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of him on the same journey, where people can trade business and emotional, personal, and professional challenges with people who will listen and come back with solutions that they hadn't even considered before. And we have this shared space in global conventions like this. Right now, we are fortunate to be part of an organisation where we can meet up with like-minded individuals regularly and challenge ourselves to be better. Now, you see, that story that I just told illustrates the system perfectly. We went straight to the meat of the tale. You were engaged, or at least I hope you were. Then came the reveal or the twist, where I linked the story to the reason why it should be important to you. Why do we focus so hard on a person or an object that is out of view, squinting our eyes and straining to see? It's because we're unsure of what it is. And why do we slow down to look at a car accident, even though in the traffic jam leading up to it, we were cursing those people in front of us who were rubbernecking? It's because we were curious about the event and we felt like we had invested the time, sat in that traffic jam, and it was our right to look. You see, you didn't know where that story I was telling you was going. And as a result, you were intrigued and you were curious and you felt like you had invested the time and had the right to hear the resolution. So I held your interest. When the payoff came and the moral presented itself to you, you felt like you had earned that reward, and there was a feeling of satisfaction, and the message stuck. And the great news is that all you ever have to do to tell an amazing story is to play your part. And we love an acronym in BNI, don't we? So I've made this one nice and easy for you. Now, please write this down. There is something amazing about when we transcribe information. It forms a neurophysical connection and it really does embed. So please write this down. However, my slides will be available. You are welcome to record this after. So P stands for problem or position. A stands for action, R is results, and T is the twist or the link that we put into place. Now, let's have a look at the Pixar story. So George Lucas, Steve Jobs, the relocation of the factory, encouraging people to work together. That was the position and the problem that they found themselves in. The action was to create the central atrium where people were forced to interact. The result was technology inspiring art and art challenging technology. And of course, the result was award-winning, critically acclaimed, financially successful movies. But the twist, the link, was that our members have the shared space each and every week in their BNI meetings, and we have the shared space in global conventions, national conferences, weekly calls that we attend. See, my goal was to remind us actually how lucky we are right now to be in an organization where we have that shared space. And by following that system, that is how you tell a great story. And I'm going to give you one more example. I'm going to put it into a BNI context. So my goal with this, and it's going to be a very quick example, is to help a chapter who do not want to grow because they are telling you that they want to focus on the members that they have during these challenging times to inspire them to grow. So I'm going to tell them a story. I'm going to tell them a story about another member in another chapter called Sally. It's not Sully. It's not the monster from Monsters, Inc. It is Sally. Now that is the position. The problem that Sally has right now is that she's not getting business. And in 6 months' time, when her renewal comes around, she won't be renewing. The action that we take is we focus on the missing professions from her chapter that we know are going to pass her 2/3 of all of her referrals and are currently missing. So we go about arranging stack days and focus days. And when Sally's renewal comes around, the result is she rejoins for 2 years because she has a full and dynamic power team around her, passing tons of business. The twist is that growth is not the goal. And if you haven't seen that presentation on BNI University, please, please do. It's amazing. We were able to focus on supporting our members in the best possible way by filling their power teams. And as a side effect of that, the chapter grew. You see, the chapter we're telling this story to, they have a pride. They are proud of the fact that they support their members. And we've just shown them that the very best way of supporting members who currently aren't getting what they should from their membership is to grow their power teams around them. That chapter will embrace that message and embrace those actions because they want to be seen to be supporting their members. You see, by telling stories, you're going to create true action heroes. Those members and directors that understand why they should take massive and immediate action to achieve amazing results. In June 2018, in a large, hot conference room outside Dublin in Ireland, Jamie paused. Somewhere over the rainbow by the Hawaiian legend, Israel Kamakaole filled the room. But Jamie stared down at a piece of paper with a 1 and a 2 printed on it. The guy on stage had just asked him to write down both a business goal and a personal goal. The business goal was simple. He wanted to bring a new chapter into the world. But the personal one, however, held so much more weight. Jamie had recently lost a close friend, Ben. And Ben had left a wife and 2 young children, Poppy and Blake, behind. And they were in desperate need of help. Jamie was determined that his tribute to Ben was going to be supporting his family. So next to the number 2, Jamie wrote down to complete the London to Brighton cycle ride and raise money for Ben's family. He pulled on a white silicone band with the phrase, "How will you feel in 30 minutes" embossed on it. He rested his hand on the piece of paper and with his phone, he took a picture of his goals. He emailed it to the speaker because that's what he was asked to do. You see, it was at this moment that stories about diamonds, rugby players, the Beatles, swimmers, and warriors had inspired Jamie to become a true action hero. There was a problem. Jamie hadn't cycled or exercised in years, but in September 2018, spurred on by a close friend, Paul, who was joining him on the journey, and that little white band, he began training. It was painful when he fell off the bike. It was excruciating and agonizing when the sweat stung his eyes. But when he crossed the finish line, Sunday, June 16th, 2019, with the sea to his right-hand side on Madeira Drive in Brighton, following what he described as a brutal and emotional day. He had hit the £7,500 target that he knew would make a difference for Erin, Poppy, and Blake. But Jamie didn't stop there. Realizing he could do more, he continued raising money for great causes. He felt his confidence growing as his fitness improved, his well-being, his mental state, and he even treated himself to a solid silver version of that little white band that had helped him along his journey. To date, our true action hero, Jamie Sinclair, and I do hope he's on the call today, has lost over 70 pounds in weight, 30 kilograms, and raised over £10,000 for amazing causes. And how far has he gone on the bike? Jamie has cycled 10,000 miles in 2 years and 3 months. When I told those stories from the stage in Dublin, I was hoping to make an impact to those people in the room. But stories are powerful. They went beyond those walls and made a difference to the world. You see, I've been told about a young catering student who overcame anxiety to claim distinction in her exams. An alcoholic who battled her addiction and is still sober today. And as well as being sober, has changed the health and the happiness of those around her along her journey. And of course, Ben's family, who now know that even in their darkest hour, there are heroes like Jamie in this world. I make no claim or take any credit for the results I have just shared, but I want you to realize, as I said at the start of this session, mastering storytelling will be the single most impactful skill for your BNI journey, your business, and your life. And if you tell enough stories to enough people, you will change the world for the better. Thank you for all you do.